Hello, my name is AJ Goldsby. I'm a life master from Pensacola, Florida, and today I wanted to bring you a video on a very famous chess game. This is the game Mikhail Tal versus Johan Hjartarsson. It was played at the International Chess Tournament in Reykjavik 1987. Just a few personal notes here. I may add some interest to the game. I personally know both players or have met both players. Of course, Tal is deceased now. He died a number of years ago. But in 1995, I played at the New York Open, and I met and played Tal there. And many years ago, when I was in the United States Air Force, I was stationed for a year and a half at a small radar site called Rockville Air Base, which is not too far from the Keflavik Navy Base in southern Iceland. And of course, I visited Reykjavik many times. I used to take the bus up there just about every weekend. They had regular buses that ran, and they weren't very expensive back in those days. So I visited the site of the 1972 World Championship many times, and also I visited the main playing hall there. And I actually met Hjartarsson a number of times. He's a very congenial, very nice fellow, very strong grandmaster. He was, ranked one of the world's easily in the world's top 100. In fact, I'm pretty sure that he was in the top 50 for a number of years, and he was also a candidate for the world's championship. But without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and go into this game. Many grandmasters and many of the world's top masters believe this to be the best game Tal have ever played. It's not my very favorite game of Tal's, not because it's not brilliant or I don't believe it to be brilliant, but simply because I like some of the other games he plays, and he's played another number of smashing brilliancies. And if you're really curious, you can find my webpage on Mikhail Tal with any search engine, and you can find that I've annotated a number of Mikhail Tal's famous chess games. The one I'm thinking about I like is that he played when he was very young. He was just a very young teenager. It was when he won his first USSR championship and he sacked his queen. That's one of my favorite Tal games of all time. But anyway, without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this chess game. And again, this is the game Tal-Hjartarsson from the International Chess Tournament in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1987. E4, E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6. Of course, this is the main line of the Ruy Lopez, or some people call it the Spanish opening, the Spanish torture. Bishop a4, knight f6, white castles, bishop e7. This is the closed variation. Of course, the open variation is knight takes pawn on e4. If you're interested and want to see both a web page and a video I did on the open variation, again, you can use the Google search engine and find it fairly rapidly, but you should be able to find a game that I played against Doug Strout. I have both a YouTube video on that game and also a very comprehensive web page on that game. And that's on the open variation of the Ruy Lopez. Bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop to b3, black castles, c3, and here black plays d6. Of course, you can play d5, which leads to the very famous Marshall Gambit. The main line of that, just running through it very quickly, is captures, he takes d5, knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, rook takes e5, c6, d4, bishop to d6, rook e1, queen h4. Black has excellent play for the pawn compensation. We'll leave it to the opening theoreticians to decide who is better. Both white and black have won many brilliant games from this position. And if you're curious, I would suggest you get a really good book and or a DVD on this opening. But anyway, back to our game. D6, of course, this is the main line, the quote-unquote closed Ruy Lopez, or closed Spanish. H3. Now, a lot of times when my students waste the tempo on playing pawn to king rook 3 or, as white or black in the opening, I will chide them and, criticize them, tell them you don't need to waste the tempo. So right away, a lot of my students, when I showed them this game, they were saying, why isn't this a waste of tempo? Why isn't a loss of time? I also teach my students that generally a knight, because it is a bishop, because it is a long-range piece, is a much better piece than a knight, so you really shouldn't be too worried about preventing a pin and all that. To understand this opening, you really have to understand what Karpov did a very good video on a DVD did on the Ruy Lopez, and he talked about the Ruy Lopez of the Spanish opening being a battle for d4. Basically, if white controls d4 and succeeds in dominating this square in the opening, then he usually emerges from the opening with an advantage and can go on to win. Whereas black, if black can have sufficient control of the d4 square or prevent white from dominating, then black obtains easy equality. So that's really what this h3 move is about. It's about prophylaxis, preventing this pin, and also mainly because white's interested in, controlling the d4 square. Also, h3 is a useful move for a lot of masters. It's one of the reasons the Ruy Lopez / Spanish is such a popular opening played by amateurs all the way up to world champions, is because and especially good a choice for, say, a grandmaster to play against a lower rated player, is because it prevents a lot of exchanges and the game remains very complicated for a very long period of time. And it's much more likely that the grandmaster will find his way and successfully navigate, the types of positions that will arise from this opening, whereas the low rated player is more likely to quickly go wrong. But anyway, h3 is a very good move. Again, the main idea is to prevent the pin, not because the knight is so important, but because we're all about, in the white side of the Ruy Lopez, trying to control this vital d4 square. Black plays knight a5, bishop c2, c5, d4, queen c7, knight bd2. And now comes the move. The main line is c takes d4. And if you want to see that line, you can just simply go to the Chess Games website, look up any modern day grandmaster, and you'll see many games in this line. Black plays the move bishop d7. This move was very popular at the time this game was played, but it's not so popular now. Again, the main line today is c takes d4. You can look that up in MCO. But back when this game was played, bishop d7 was very much one of the more popular lines at that time. Knight f1, c takes d4, c takes d4, rac8, knight e3. This is centralizing the knight, eyeing the f5 outpost, and also, too, the knight on e3 guards the bishop on c2. Knight back to c6, d5. That's a very good move. Seals the center, kicks the knight. The knight comes to b4. That looks like a very damaging move. A lot of beginners and lower rated players think, oh, this is such a great move. You are threatening to win the piece, but white simply plays bishop b1. And now black plays a5. Now, very quickly, let's just talk about this position, at least just briefly. White is much better, probably, well, not a lot better, but white is clearly better simply because he controls more space. This nice little pawn wedge at d5 and e4 controls the center and also blocks out black's pieces and cuts the chessboard in half. White can play on the queen side or the king side because he has much more space, control of space, because of this pawn wedge in the center. Black's plan, however, on the other hand, is maybe to play moves like knight back to a6, b4, and then knight c5. If black succeeds with that plan, he very oftentimes he gains an easy equality. So that will explain what happens in the next few moves. White plays a3 to kick the knight, knight a6. And again, I already explained that black's idea is to play b4 and knight c5. So this explains white's next move, b4. Soltis, who is much more in tune with the common player, I consider him to be more relevant to the lower rated player, to the average player, than, say, John Nunn, because John Nunn is very technical. He awards this move an exclam. And almost all my students, all the people that I've ever showed this game to, have always asked me, hey, AJ, why doesn't that drop a pawn? Well, let's just very briefly look at that. A takes b4, a takes b4, knight takes b4, bishop d2. And now you can see this knight's attacked, and black has no way of defending it. So black can play knight takes pawn on d5 and win yet another pawn, but in the long run, that's not going to do him any good. The knight's lost, and he's going to be down material, and 2 pawns, generally at the grandmaster level, is not enough for a single minor piece. So anyway, going back here to the move after white plays, let's back up one move. White plays b4 exclam. Again, the idea is to gain space. Sets a little trap, but that's not the main idea. The main idea is to prevent the black knight from arriving at the c5 square. Black plays g6. This is a very common idea. You see this a lot in the closed Ruy Lopez in the main lines. And again, if you want to see those, just pick up a book like Modern Chess Openings, or go to the Chess Games website, www.chessgames.com, and play through a bunch of Grandmaster games. You'll see this over and over and over again. The main idea in the closed Ruy Lopez is black plays g6. Very oftentimes you have a white knight, if not on e3, the knight can also be on g3, and g6 prevents that knight on g3 in those variations from reaching f5 or h5, and also prepares a redeployment of the black's bishop. He plays rook e8, bishop to f8, bishop to g7, and redeploys his dark-squared bishop to a much better square. Basically sets up a kind of King's Indian type of defense long before the King's Indian was ever known. And this maneuver of redeploying the dark-squared bishop has been around for well over 100 years. I've seen it in games like that Blackburn played back in the 1800s. But anyway, black plays g6. Just moving on down into the game, white plays bishop d2, just guarding and also threatening pawn takes pawn, winning a pawn. A takes b4, a takes b4. Queen b7. Black had to guard his knight over here. He didn't want to drop the knight there. Bishop d3. This move was a theoretical novelty when this game was very first played, and that's why the N is there. And bishop d3 exclamation point after a move denotes a very good move. So that's a very good move. It was a new move, brand new move, when this game was first played back in 1987. And it's just a real interesting idea. White just basically centralizes. He prepares possibly queen e2, double attacking his pawn. And after queen e2, white has just a lovely position. He could attack on the king side if black, got bogged down on the queen side, or he could play queen e2 and play his rooks to the, say double on the a file and attack on the queen side. So white has a lot of free play here in this position. Black plays knight c7. Knight c2 exclam. Again, white's just redeploying and saving his pieces. Knight h5, bishop to e3, rook a8, queen d2. Now here, let's just talk about this position here a little bit. Again, we can see white's, bearing down on the dark squares. His pieces kind of point at both sides of the board. He's got his rooks connected. Black does too. But I think one could easily argue that black's queen on b7, that's not obviously the best square for the queen. The knight on c7, again, not a good square for the knight, especially in lieu of the fact that white has this white pawn on d5. The bishop on d7, that's a fairly useful square, kind of a passive square, but it's a useful square for both attack on defense. It defends the queen side and attacks the king side. Black's dark squared bishop here on e7 is kind of blocked in, hemmed in by its own pawns. So it's a semi-bad bishop. It's half good, half bad, but it's not real great shape. So one could argue here that white is easily better, and I think that would be the correct evaluation of this position. Rook takes a1, rook takes a1. Oh, knight takes a1, exclam. White recaptured with the knight. The idea is knight b3 to a5, exploiting the knight outpost. And there's a very nice idea there. You always should exploit outposts. Knights in the middle games almost always should look for advanced squares which to occupy. These are known as knight outposts and can easily change the tide of the game. In fact, I've noticed one of the things that many grandmasters would do, and strong players, even masters, would do in many of the games when I was first learning chess, was about anywhere from between move 10 to 15, they would post a knight on e5 or d5. And in chess, in other words, they get a knight into a center square, an outpost square. And when I first started playing chess, I didn't really understand that, but that kind of occupation of a key central square by a dominant knight can easily give one side the advantage, especially whoever put the knight on the advanced outpost square can easily dominate the play and hold the upper hand for quite a long time. But anyway, knight takes a1. That looks like a passive retreating move, but it's actually, again, a redeployment of this knight, preparing maybe knight b3 to knight a5. Black plays f5. Black had to do this. This is like that King's Indian type of counterattack. Black had to do this or risk slowly being squeezed to death. Bishop h6, that's attacking the rook. Knight g7. Black's trying to cover up his weaknesses. Also, h5 wasn't such a great square for the knight. And again, I can't analyze every single move and explore every single possible variation and subvariation because we'd simply be here forever. That's just not possible. So anyway, knight b3, f4. Now this is both good and bad. I think probably the bad outweighs the good because after f4, this bishop here on e7 is forever a bad bishop. I mean, there's no way in an endgame you can argue that this black's DSB, his dark squared bishop, is going to be a good piece. So f4 kind of blocks white's pieces out and sort of shields them out, but also at the same time It makes black's piece a very bad piece. It also gives white a completely free hand. He can now concentrate all of his energy, say like rook here, knight to a5, rook here, and then white can double on the a file. And with a knight on a5, he's all ready to plop that knight into c6. That nice knight square again, another advanced square supported by a pawn. And with all these lines closed on the king side, white doesn't need to fear, a quick king side attack or counterattack by black. So f4 is both good and bad, but he's sealing off the king side, and I've often wondered, about the logic of some of these moves. White plays knight a5. Nice move, almost an exclam. Hits the queen with a gain of tempo. Black queen with a gain of tempo. Prepares the knight to further advance into, to get into black's position with knight c6. In other words, placing both of the heavy pieces here on the c file, and then knight c6 is coming. Queen b6. Rook c1. Rook a8. Queen c2. Now just threatening to win a piece here on c7. Knight ce8. And I've analyzed this game recently. I went through it with two or three new engines: Komodo, Houdini, and also Deep Fritz 14, just to name a few. And it would be impossible to show you the number of ideas that I had, and a lot of the credit goes to the chess engines. The Komodo, I believe, is the very strongest possible commercial engine available at the moment. This is September 2016. Houdini is also a very strong program, and obviously Deep Fritz 14 is also another strong program. I also still like to use the program Rybka. Rybka's kind of got a checkered past. It was one of the strongest commercial programs for a long time, won several world championships, but was stripped of its title when it found out that the originator of Rybka basically just copied code that was on the internet. In other words, he took open source engines and just borrowed that. So after that was discovered, Rybka was stripped of its chess titles, its computer titles, by the World International Chess Federation, FIDE. So anyway, knight ce8. But I used a number of programs again just to look at this game, and the amount of ideas at almost every move is almost limitless. And if I got into those, we'd be here all day. But I just did want to talk about some general ideas. In other words, like black's idea to seal the king side there, that was a key moment in the game, and maybe one that the computers could definitely improve upon. Queen b3, bishop f6, knight c6, knight h5, queen b2. That's a very nice move. Bishop g7. Black tires of this piece, the white bishop being near his king, and also too, he's getting to trade off his quote-unquote bad bishop for white's good bishop. Bishop takes g7, king takes g7. Now, also black could have captured that piece with either one of those knights, and that would have been a totally different game and maybe led to something different. White's still better, I think, in that position, simply because he has more space and a little bit freer game for his pieces. And probably, definitely, white's king is more secure. But, it's a totally different game if he had captured the bishop on g7, recaptured that piece with one of his knights. Anyway, king takes g7, and now comes the shot, rook c5. There's the shot. That's the unexpected move. Literally almost knocked Hjartarsson out of his chair. One of the greatest grandmasters that ever lived. I never met the man, but I very admired him. I have books on him. When I was a young man, Svetozar, some people say Gligoric, I think is the English pronunciation. I think the correct pronunciation of his name is Gligoric, but he was a Yugoslavian chess player who, when I was a young man back in the 70s, had a regular column in the Chess Life, the Game of the Month, and I used to live, breathe, and eat that column every month and almost try to memorize those columns. I thought those were some of the best chess stuff ever written. It certainly, and I would study it, and it's what prompted a lot of people called me a book player. In other words, and a lot of the book that I learned was from studying that column every month. I literally used to try to memorize that. I would go over the games over and over and over again. So that's and one of the greatest players who ever lived, as far as teachers and writers, in my opinion, was Svetozar Gligoric. But he wrote that this was one of the most amazing and exquisite chess moves ever played in a game of chess. White's threatening b5. He's threatening to perhaps double on the file. He's threatening to do a lot of different things there. And black just simply can't ignore that rook for too terribly long. Plays queen a6. I think taking it right away is a total disaster. I think we can just briefly look at that. D takes c5. Knight f takes e5. King g8. Knight takes d7. And then b takes c5. White's got this big army of pawns here, 3 connected passers threatening to rush up the board, and he's regained, I think, his exchange. White has 3 minor pieces to black's 2. White's down in exchange, but in return he has a tremendous pieces. If black wants to exchange queens, queen check, queen takes, rook takes check, king h2. But then black, with the little bit of pieces he has left, I don't think he's going to be able to stop this onslaught of pieces. And plus, white's threatening bishop takes pawn in that line of b5 after the queen exchange to win that pawn as well. So I don't think black can stop this armada of pawns, and computer analysis will show that I'm correct. So that's just one line there. I don't want to analyze everything from that position, but rook c5 is a tremendous move. Hjartarsson plays a fairly good move, queen a6. Rook takes b5. There's that move that is a very neat little move. Knight c7. Rook b8. Exclam. That looks like just an unusual move. And there we go. There's the queen drop. Queen takes d3. That was also rook b8 was a piece sack because it looks like it just drops a piece. And now we get another chess shot. And this is just another amazing move by Mikhail Tal. We get the knight sack on e5. Knight c takes e5. I give that a double exclam because, white's already invested one piece. His rook is hanging, but he doesn't seem to care about anything. He just knight takes pawn. But once you realize what this move does, it's very logical because it, opens up obviously now the target is this king sitting on the other end of that diagonal, the queen sitting there on b2. So obviously that's a very, tough move. Queen d1 check, king h2, and now rook a1. And the beginner looks at this game and thinks, wow, there's like mate in 1 with queen a1 and with the g3 escape square sealed off by both the f4 pawn and the knight on g3. It almost looks like white can resign. But Tal's got everything covered. You got knight g4 discovered check, king there, knight h6 check, king e7, knight g8 check, and now just king f7, I believe, which is the only legal move since this back rank is cut off there. King f7. That there black resigned, but the end of the game could easily be. Let's see if I have that. Yes, knight g8 there, and look at that. Look at that knight that the trip that knight g8, that amazing horse that moves so many times during the game. All right, king f7. All right, let's see. That's going to lock up there. I'm not really sure. Oh, I have to hit escape. That's what I have to do. Okay, king f7, and now the final move would be knight g5 mate. Again, that knight on g8's one of the most amazing knight journeys of all time. I think it made between 12 and 15 moves during that game. One can almost argue that this knight single-handedly won this chess game. The average player could never get away with that, but Tal was far from being the average player. In fact, he was a very talented player. It's my own personal belief that if Tal had never been sick and never gotten ill, that he would have been world champion and been a dominant player for many, many years. This concludes my video on this very famous chess game. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to support my efforts of making great web pages and making chess videos as well, please go to the PayPal website. That's www.paypal.com, and make a donation there. My suggested donation is $35 a year to under my email account, which is LifeMasterAJ@yahoo.com. Again, my name is AJ Goldsby. Thank you for watching my video, and have a great day.